Currents. Western Reiki Association presents Reiki Currents, a Reiki News live talk show, bringing you interviews with Reiki wisdom holders and stories of hope and healing from around the world. I'm Stephen Vandiver. I'm your host. The focus on Reiki is to spotlight one of the world's fastest growing self-care, spiritual, and personal development tools. Everyone can learn this calming, relaxing, and healing technique and channel universal life force energy. As we come to know that the universe and everything around us, including our physical bodies, is made up entirely of energy, learning to effectively work with that energy is key. Reiki is a priceless addition to your personal spiritual development toolbox. Our guest tonight is Colleen Benelli. She's a doctor of shamanism, founder of Reiki Lifestyle in Gresham, Oregon, just outside Portland, and creator of Reiki Chat, a Reiki Lifestyle podcast. Colleen is an Asui Holy Fire 2 Karuna Reiki Master Teacher, a senior professional licensed Reiki Master Teacher for the International Center for Reiki Training, and a contributing author for Reiki News Magazine since 2005. Colleen's an associate teacher for the Light Song School of Shamanic Studies and has created Reiki programs for the school. She's a full-time Reiki practitioner and blends her Reiki and shamanic healing techniques in her Reiki sessions. Good evening, Colleen. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome tonight. I wanted to start off and talk about your discovery of energy work. Have you always been an energy healer? Or how did that come about for you?
Well, I think probably like most of us that are interested in Reiki, it really was a lifetime journey. And I believe now that in other cultures and other times, I might have been identified as a child who naturally had an aptitude for these ways, as demonstrated by my imagination, my interest in spirituality, my interest in the expanded vision of the world. And I think I always had that. I was raised Catholic, and I really liked being Catholic as a child. I left the church in my teenage years when I started questioning authority, and really spent a long time trying to find some source of, I didn't know it was energy healing. I didn't even really have that concept. I think I had heard of laying on of hands. But now I can look at it and see the natural progression of how I was guided into these styles of practices. And in addition, in my ancestral history, I come from a very long line of spiritual people, and I'm sure that in the back, if I were to be able to actually meet a lot of those ancestors, there was probably a healing lineage. But I didn't really discover these ways until I was in my 40s and my early 40s. I was like 39, 40 years old. And I think as oftentimes we start seeking the meaning of life in those ages, and I was the same. I had a 30-acre farm. We had lived there at that time for maybe 10 or 12 years, and always had animals and horses and kids, and kind of a really farm life. I was making my living as a fiber artist, and I traveled to different arts festivals in the Pacific Northwest and sold my fiber art there. And at the time, I also, my kids were teenagers, and I had a lot of time, and I was riding horses all the time. That was my major, not only hobby, but passion, and where I put a lot of time every day. And during that time, actually, my hairstylist, Kathy, said, you should do this thing called a soul retrieval. Well, I had been researching different styles of spirituality, attending workshops, reading books. I loved Marianne Williamson, and at the time, that's kind of when Gary Zukov was around, and Wayne Dyer, and all of these Deepak Chopra, all of these really great teachers. And so I was following a lot of those work and decided I would go ahead and have a soul retrieval. And having no idea even what that meant, which, in case anybody doesn't know what that means, it's a shamanic technique based on the idea that through life trauma, we can become fragmented. And there is, in psychology, it might be called dissociation. In shamanism, there's actually a method called soul retrieval of bringing those dissociated pieces back and actually heal them and bring them back to the body. So anyway, it was so profound that I thought, oh, my whole family needs these, and my kids had them, and my husband had a soul retrieval, and my friends and their friends. I mean, I was just on fire with it. And I saw the profound results. And at the time, the woman who gave me the soul retrieval, Jan Inglesmith, actually became my very first teacher in these ways. And she started teaching shamanic practices. And I really just started doing them because it was fun. I liked it. I had no idea it was healing. And one of the reasons that it never occurred to me that I would work in healing is my empathy was so powerful that if somebody felt pain, I felt pain. And if they cried, I cried. So that wasn't going to be helpful as a practitioner. So about 4 years into my shamanic training, which I loved, I still didn't think anything about really becoming a professional working in the healing arts. And my horse, I've always had horses, but this was like my lifetime dream horse. I just loved this horse. And so anyway, I got him as a 3-year-old, and I was training him and spending a lot of hours with him, and he ended up going lame, and he was only 5 years old. He was still a baby. And I just was, it was, clear that it would probably be a permanent lameness. And I asked him what happened. I said, how come this happened? And he told me that he went lame to deliver me to my power to heal. And he showed me laying hands on him. And I knew enough about what he was talking about or showing me, that he was showing me Reiki. And so what's really strange to me now is that I actually didn't believe in Reiki at the time. I thought, oh, sure, I know somebody does this stuff with you, and then you have it. And I thought, oh, that's not possible. And what I know now that I didn't know then is I had such a strong belief that anything I wanted, I had to work hard for. I also was very unskilled at receiving. And as we know now, being long-term Reiki practitioners, it really is teaching us how to receive. So I procrastinated and I didn't get my Reiki attunements. And I had a booth in downtown Portland at the Saturday market. And a woman came up to me and said that she was a psychic. And she said, I have a message for you from your horse, and would you like to hear it? So of course I said yes. And she said, well, he told me to tell you that he's been telling you to do something and you haven't done what he's telling you, and you need to do it because life is coming and you're going to need it. So I immediately knew it was Reiki. I was so grateful that I didn't end up having the proverbial 2x4 to catch my attention, that I received the message in such a gentle way. And I immediately received my Reiki attunements. That was back in the year 2000. And it was this instant. And when I say instant, I don't know if it was that day or 2 weeks later, but it was this instant recognition of, I know what this is. This is it. This is what I have been seeking my whole life. And so I pursued it, but I didn't have the training that I felt I needed to be as professional as I wanted to be if I were going to pass this on and start teaching it. And I was absolutely compelled by it. So it became something that I just wanted to do Reiki all the time. I felt like I wanted to share it. I wanted to teach it. I wanted to talk about it. And I needed to find avenues of ways to do that. And of course, I was fortunate that I was already part of the Lights On School of Shamanic Studies in our community and had a big population of people who also shared those ideas and wanted to talk about it. But then I decided that I needed more professional training. And that's when I went to England in 2003 and took the class in Glastonbury with William Rand and received my attunements in Stonehenge, which was,
Wow.
yeah, well, it was so powerful. And most of all, a couple of things that I've skipped over. There were two things that really happened with my attunements, and then also what happened in taking William's class, is that my Reiki attunements actually gave me a tool, like you said in your introduction, that it's a tool to manage my empathy. And my empathy actually became something that I could utilize in a kind of telepathic way, but so I could empathize with what a person was going through, and it could take me into a really deep level of active listening, but I no longer felt what they felt. So it changed my empathy, and more than anything gave me empathy. Other thing that happened, when I was originally trained, I was trained in many of the old traditions. And then when I went to William's class, I found out more about how Yusui Sensei practiced in a very intuitive style. And that seemed to just open it all up for me. I had been trained, and I don't know exactly where some of these traditions came in, but for instance, that my hand positions had to be in the exact same hand positions for 3 minutes, and then I would move to the next hand position for 3 minutes, and then I would move to the next one. So that kind of thing. So anyway, I learned about Yusui Sensei practicing a very intuitive and spiritual style of Reiki, and it just opened up the whole Reiki energy for me, and I became even more passionate about it. And then I decided that I wanted to become a licensed teacher for the ICRT, join their advanced teacher training program, which actually took me about 4.5 years to complete. It doesn't take everybody that long, but that's how long it took me. And at the same time, I continued in my shamanic studies with Lights On. I received my doctorate through that school in shamanic studies, and continued on with the ICRT as a licensed teacher. And I am as passionate and compelled by Reiki today as I ever was. And that led to the very profound experience where I met you back in September, where we were both on Mount Kurama in Japan, practicing and learning and, sharing Reiki in the location where it's believed that Yusui Sensei actually received the gift of Reiki to begin with.
Yeah, and that was a beautiful, beautiful time. And that brings up a good point as well. Now, back in 2003, when you were in Williams' class in Glastonbury, and you were attuned there, or since you were attuned, at what point was it 2013, 2014 that Holy Fire Reiki came out?
Yes, Holy Fire Reiki came, I always say, came to the planet through William Rand in January of 2014. So it's been actually just 4 years now.
Mm.
And that is, I received it probably a week after William, and have been practicing it exclusively ever since.
That's great. And so I know there are a lot of Reiki attuned individuals out there, and Holy Fire Reiki is really catching fire. It's really proliferating quite a bit. I mean, this upgrade is pretty significant. How was it for you as a practitioner? Before Holy Fire Reiki and after Holy Fire Reiki, what's the difference for you?
Well, first of all, let me explain to people that I have a very shamanic viewpoint of Reiki and how it works, because that actually I was in shamanic studies before I received Reiki and was always working in shamanic techniques and works with Reiki. So I have that perspective of it. And through my training, I've studied literally all over the world with some amazing teachers of energy medicines or shamanic practices in all different traditions. So I've really worked with a lot of different spiritual guides. I've worked with a lot of different spiritual dimensions to do my healing work. And I would say that I had probably done, I don't even remember now, and I'd have to go back and actually look to make sure that I'm stating accurately, but definitely well into the thousands of soul retrievals in my practice prior to Holy Fire Reiki. So I have a comparison as a practitioner, and I've been a full-time practitioner for a long time. So I had a lot of experience before, and I've had a lot of experience afterwards. And all of it has been extraordinary. And my work with Usui Tibetan Reiki, which is what I was attuned to with William. So my first attunements, I would say, would have been more in alignment with the lineage of the Reiki Alliance. And then my next attunements with William, of course, the Mrs. Takata and Phyllis Furumoto and Iris Ishikura, and many of those masters are in that lineage as well. But we were actually practicing Usui Tibetan Reiki, which was a combination of the Usui symbols and the Tibetan Reiki symbols, and also Karuna Reiki. So working with all of those energies. And at the time I was working with those in using that energy as my source of healing energy in my shamanic techniques. So even though I was using the technique called soul retrieval, I've always used the energy of Reiki to actually do the work. And I think that's an important part for people to understand, that ultimately what we're doing is working with a non-physical energy. I happen to think of it as God energy, divine energy, but people also can think of it as a biofield. Usui Sensei called it universal energy. So lots of ways that the energy itself can be defined. But essentially what we're doing as practitioners is we are giving access to that non-physical energy to come in and be physical and deliver that non-physical energy through a physical means. And that's what Reiki is doing. So even if I were doing the technique of soul retrieval, I was using the energy of Reiki to do that work. So I had beautiful results. Usui Reiki, Tibetan Reiki, Holy Fire Reiki, they're all beautiful. And to me, it comes down to what energy you feel guided to, what calls you. So in 2014, I would have had Usui Tibetan Reiki and been practicing very actively for 10, 11 years at that time. And William called and told me about Holy Fire, and this most amazing thing had happened, that he had been working with his spiritual advisor, Janice Jones, and the energy of Holy Fire came to him and asked him if he would bring it into the system of Reiki. And he said yes. And that was a Thursday morning. And the next day, he had students coming to his Reiki center in Hana, Hawaii. And all of them thought, of course, they were going for Usui Tibetan Reiki. And he thought that on Thursday morning. And then by Thursday afternoon, found out, in fact, that this new energy had invited or he had invited it. They had agreed that he would bring it in through this system of Reiki. So as we know the story of the history of that, he was very unsure. And, I teach with William pretty often, so I hear his story and of course was talking to him during that time in his own personal experience of what that was like. For him, he didn't have manuals. There was a new style of attunement called an ignition that came in. And all he could do, and what he told me at the time, is he said, all I can do is do what Holy Fire asks me. And at the time, it still wasn't even named. And he asked about the name, and it was very definite that it wanted to be called Holy Fire, that was its nature, and that's what it was to be called. And then he really just went into a state of listening for how it wanted to come through. And I decided to do that at the same time. He asked if I would receive Holy Fire Reiki, and, participate in discovering what the energy is and how it would be defined and what its qualities were. So I also agreed that I would receive it and that I would practice it and get to understand it and to learn it. And so I started working with Holy Fire, and in all of my practices and all of the tools and techniques that I use in my Reiki practice as a practitioner, I started asking Holy Fire how it did the same thing. So in shamanic terms, we do what's called an extraction technique, or there are multiple extraction techniques you might use. So I would ask Holy Fire, how did it do an extraction technique, which is extracting an unwanted energy from a person. And then I would ask Holy Fire, how did it do soul retrievals? And I would just let it flow through me so it could teach me. So that is the spiritual side of it. On the human side, I went, what? Like, what? There's this new energy and now it's different and I'm teaching it. I don't have a manual yet. And I'm just doing this on faith and trust. And I had a lot of personal agendas with my business practices that had to change and all these different things. It was kind of wild for me, actually. And so here's what actually happened that changed it all for me. Lightsong has a class that is a year-long course that has a 2-day ceremony at the end of it, in which the students learn how to work with their spirit guide and merge with that guide and let that guide do the healing work in the ceremony. So I had not told anyone about Holy Fire yet because it was so expansive all of a sudden that I had to just hold it into myself. And I went to this ceremony, and it was a lot of effort to get there. And I remember just being really compelled. I have to be at this ceremony. And it wasn't my own class. It's just one that I was supporting the students in. So I went, and at the end of the second day, literally maybe the last half an hour of the second day, one of the students came up to me, and he was still merged with his guide to do some healing work on me. And he placed his hand, and I did not know this person well. I mean, I recognized him, and knew his name, but we hadn't really spent time together. So anyway, because he wasn't one of my students, he was in a different class than what I teach. So anyway, he came up to me, and he was merged, and, kind of had that otherworldly look in his eyes. And he placed his hand on my heart, and he looked at me, and he said, "Oh, you have a new symbol in your heart, and this symbol is going to change the world. You'll be a leader in this, and you have nothing to be worried about. This symbol is going to change the world." So I had tears flowing down my face with this experience, because I knew in that moment that all the things I was worried about, all my agendas, everything else, all the human side of it, my ego is what it really is, just heard in that moment that I was meant to do this. And that in that moment, as is also part of my training in the years of working with spiritual energies with different teachers, where, I would commit to a year of study with one particular spiritual energy or one particular guide, just like in this particular class that I'm speaking about. So I committed to a year that I would work exclusively with Holy Fire Reiki energy in all of my work so that I could learn. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be a leader in this, then I need to gain mastery with it. I need to understand it. I need to be able to experience it and communicate about it. So I did, and I had my own personal healing that I went through with it all. I wrote an article about healing my religious trauma, which I think Holy Fire is profoundly affecting us in. It told me originally that it came to the planet as a, what were the exact words? It's the words are escaping me, but it showed me that it was a symbol or an energy of unification. And it showed me images, and this is all in a journey with it, as I'm listening with it. It showed me a young tribal woman in a nomadic tribe, and she was the fire tender. So she had this, like round bowl that she carried the coal from the fire and carried it to the next location where they would stop. And it was her responsibility to make sure that this coal stayed lit so the fire could be lit when they stopped in the next place. So she showed me taking her hot coal and lighting her fire. And then she took a hot coal and took it to another young woman, who then took that coal and lit her fire. And then she took her coal and took it to another young woman, and she lit her fire, and did that all the way through the people. And that was their role. They were the fire tenders. And it showed me that, it called itself a fire of unification. That was the term. And so it showed me that there were resources for all of us and that we can share, that there are enough resources. So I started working with it from that perspective and started watching myself and the results of it. And in the techniques that I've used, I would say that they have changed, and that the way I used to do soul retrieval and the way I do it now with Holy Fire is really very different. The energy of it is very different. And I love the way it works. And what I would say about it is that it has shown me that at first I thought it meant unification on a global level and to heal that religious trauma that is so at the core of so many wars and so many conflicts is religious differences, and that it would heal that. And then what it has shown me, and again, I've probably done, I would have to say somewhere, I haven't ever counted, but just knowing the way my practice is, I've done at least in the 1,000 sessions, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And I've probably taught, I don't know, hundreds anyway, in the high hundreds of students with it. And so I've really had an opportunity to see the results. And what it's showing me now is that fire of unification is inside of us. And it's unifying our spirit that is always whole. It's embodied. It couldn't be anywhere else. It has to be in our body. And our spirit is always whole. And that the only reason we can't see it sometimes and see our own wholeness is because of the injuries we sustain in life. And so what I watch is Holy Fire revealing that wholeness. And as that wholeness is revealed, the soul receives that truth, that in truth, we are just brilliant and beautiful beings living in a human body. Our spirit is embodied. The presence of God is embodied. And it's expressing in our daily life. So it's unifying our higher consciousness. And I just even recently in some of the work that I've been doing, it's been going way out, like into these really high levels of consciousness that are incredibly expansive. And I'm watching it reveal people's highest qualities. So the way that it does the healing work, I would say, going back to your original question, what would I notice in some of the differences, is that the focus is on revealing the spirit more than healing the injuries. So the injuries are always healed, and they're healed in this beautiful, loving energy that holds the grace of forgiveness and this power of love and compassion. I watch as people are letting go of their burdens and the things that the injuries they have sustained, and sometimes they don't even know what they are. And I watch the energy just scan their body and go into the original cause. That could be in other lifetimes. It could be in their ancestral history. things that are passed down through their lineage. It could be from cellular memories they have, genetic memories they have, all different ways to define that according to people's belief system. So I watch it go in, and with all this love and compassion, listens to everything that happened in that soul. It hears and cares for and nurtures the injuries that have occurred to a person. Perhaps even the injuries they've caused for others. It has no judgment. There's absolutely, I have not encountered even one moment of judgment in this energy, in this light. So I'm watching it as that spirit is revealed, those highest qualities of self, and moves into the soul where the authentic self resides, because the spirit is the part of us that's always whole and connected to God. It's the presence of God. It's the presence, if you call that, consciousness, whatever you call that, that spirit is still inside of us. But sometimes it's just really small in our own vision of ourselves because of these layers that the injury can cause. So while the injuries are being healed, which is a part of every session, it would, as in all of Reiki, what's really happening is the focus is revealing the person's wholeness. And it's actually moving into their consciousness. And their consciousness is applied. All of this is applied in their daily life. So it actually becomes functional. So your spirit is functioning. Your highest consciousness is actually functioning in your everyday life. You can hear guidance in your busyness. You can, do the actions that you need to do through all the different circumstances that you might be in. So, to go back again to your question about the difference, I've been working with it for 4 years, and I find it to be very much in alignment with my energy. So let's say in comparison to some of the other spiritual energies that I have worked with and done healing work with, including, I studied in Ireland with Tom Cowan and studied fairy doctoring with him and learned how to work with the fairies, which I know a lot of people think is, really out there. But, from my perspective, I've worked with them. I've worked with South African ancestors, Celtic ancestors, Lakota ancestors. I've worked in a lot of different spiritual realms. I've studied in Tibet and Nepal with Bola Benstola and, a lot of different practitioners over the years and teachers over the years. And so as much as anything, I like it. It's in alignment with me. It works with my system. It feels good as a practitioner. And there's no judgment around whether I choose to work in these other spiritual realms or with these other energies, or I choose to work with this one. It really is, which one am I guided to and which one resonates with me. I still am friends with all my other guides. I still know them. They're still part of my friendships and relationships as I think of all the different ones that I've worked with through the years. And when I'm out in the forests and I can still perceive the fairies and talk with them. But when I'm doing my healing work and when I'm listening for my personal guidance in this kind of way, and not that it doesn't come in any other way, but in this way, then I'm working with Holy Fire Reiki energy to do all of my healing work.
Beautiful. So I want to go back to Karama. So talk a little bit about the lead up to the Karama classes. I know it seems William had been trying to get classes there for a long time, and finally got some classes in Karama, the birthplace of Reiki. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, William has actually, you're right, he's talked about having classes over there for a long time. And he's actually in the process of developing a particular course where he wanted to film the history of Reiki over in Japan and talk about Reiki at some of the sacred sites over there with Usui Sensei's memorial stone, etc. So as he was talking about it, I just popped up and said, "Can I go? I'll be the cameraman." And so he said, "Sure." And then I guess you haven't actually met Robin, but anyway, my husband, Robin, he popped up and he's like, "Can I go?" And so the three of us went over in 2016 and we traveled around Japan. A woman named Amana O was incredibly gracious, who helped us in that time and in navigating through Japan and all the places we were going and the places to stay. And so we traveled around and for a couple of weeks and filmed some of the different sacred sites and spent a week on Karama Mountain to talk about the history of Reiki, again in that location where Usui Sensei had received the gift of Reiki. And we stayed in a lovely Ryokan inn there. And the hosts were so gracious and wonderful, and which is kaiseki cuisine. And kaiseki cuisine is some of the highest quality of Japanese food that exists. And the chefs of kaiseki cuisine actually study for years to master their art. So we were there for a week and loved it and found that we could have classroom space and work with the people there and actually teach classes where we would be on the mountain. And so we set up for 2017, and again now in 2018, we set up classes that were a week long, 7 days, and it's actually a 3-day ART, Holy Fire 2 ART Masterclass, and we stretched it into 7 days. And then, of course, the one where I met you was the Holy Fire 2 Karuna Reiki class. And we were so blessed this time to have Lena Takahashi guide us and help us, and Munikai Mohammed, who live in Japan, and they wanted to study Holy Fire Reiki also. And so they were incredibly helpful in setting this all up with us and translating for us and just helping us in every way. You met them. They're such lovely people. So anyway, then we set up those classes in 2017 and again in 2018. And more than anything, I guess what I would want to convey is, first of all, when William, Robin, and I went in 2016, we spent time with the spirits of Mount Karama asking for permission to do this and to make sure that we were not imposing or doing something that, was outside of what they were welcoming. In the year that from the time we were there until the time that we actually went on the mountain, we realized that we were actually invited to be there and to bring Holy Fire there and to practice it on the mountain, that the mountain is also, the spirits are all about unification. And so they were inviting us as a unification of spiritual energies and the unification with Yusui and Holy Fire, and the unification of all the people that go there in pilgrimage. There's a tremendous diversity of people on that mountain. And so we spent time in the shrines and with the shrines and prayer and meditation. And as you know, we were on the mountain in the classrooms, and we spent hours and practice and class and talking about the Holy Fire concepts and the Yusui concepts, and listening to the trees and the nature that we were in, leaning up against trees as our seats and practicing. And then we had the really fun experience of another Reiki master, Nita Mokanu, who I studied with back in 2005. And he also studied with William. And he happened to be on the mountain on the same day with his students and colleagues. And we were all there together. And he actually teaches in France. And his students were from France and from Spain and different parts of Europe. And that's where I just felt that incredible, again, that sense of unification, of here we are all coming together, and all of the diversity, because people came to our class from all over the world, people came to his class from all over the world, people were there visiting from all over the world, all these diversities of belief. And we were all there for that purpose of being on this sacred mountain and receiving the gifts of the sacred mountain.
Yeah, it was truly a magical time. So many amazing things happened. And there was one amazing thing, one of the many amazing things that happened in Karama. It was actually a conversation with you. Do you recall when we walked down the street?
Yeah, of course.
Can you share about that?
Well, can you tell me which part? Because we took a long walk.
Conversations.
Yeah, we could have talked for a lot of which one.
Well, you were talking about the masculine coming in and building, kind of the structures, and then how the masculine and feminine come together to make things work. Is that enough for you?
Yes,
Okay.
I recall.
Yeah.
Because it was actually kind of channeled.
Yes,
as,
I got that.
As you know, you and I were talking, and I don't even remember what question you asked or something that you said, and I just felt it come through, and the words come through, and looking at all the different levels of consciousness that we have. From my perspective, there is a form that goes out beyond gender, consciousness that goes out beyond gender. And then part of the creation consciousness is the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And I've been shown in my work, this was through an article years ago I wrote about, maybe that's a whole different subject. Let me switch. So, I know this is it is a different subject. So I was shown that one of the challenges we have in humanity right now is in understanding the divine masculine and the divine feminine and how they work together. And that the divine masculine creates through giving, and the divine feminine creates through receiving. And that's just the vibration of creation. It's just the nature of creation. and how both creative forces are here on the planet. We live in a very definite expression of embodied masculine and feminine. And so we see the qualities of both. And one of the things that I have been shown is, I guess this is relevant to the conversation, is when I was writing an article, I was back to my story about being on the farm. I was writing an article about nature spirits, Reiki and nature spirits. This was maybe back in 2004, so a long time ago. And I asked the nature spirits what they wanted to say to the Reiki community. I said, you've got a big audience here. And so I started to think about what they would be saying, and I started to listen. And what I heard them, or what I started to think, was that I was going to hear them talk about reprimanding us for all the harm that we do. Like, boy, human beings have got to figure this out. They're doing this to nature and that to nature. And I heard a voice instead say, wait, if we could teach you anything, is that you would love yourselves the way we love you, because we think you're amazing. And they said, because if you loved yourself the way we love you, then you would create from that belief. But because you think yourselves to be so destructive, you create from that belief. So I started to listen, and I could hear, and I really believed it. It was showing me how so many of our creations that are, well thought out. And one example for me is gluten. I've been gluten-free for 21 years, so way before anybody talked about it or there were any gluten-free products. And I asked about that, like, what happened? Why can't I eat wheat? And because the wheat that we have currently was designed back in the 1960s. And I don't remember the man's name, but he actually won a Nobel Prize for developing this strain of wheat that could feed the masses of people, because the projections of how much food was going to be necessary was really important to people in that industry. And so he developed this strain of wheat. And I said, well, what happened? And it's not because of his belief. I'm not at all assigning this to him. So let me clarify that. They were saying it in the big picture, that because we believe ourselves to be destructive, we create from that belief. And so ultimately, many of our things end up destructive when we're even starting out with good intentions. And so that led to the whole thing about the divine masculine and feminine in the conversation you and I were having about the patriarch and men in general. There's a lot of man bashing that goes on, and
I believe that's what I was doing.
Maybe that's what it was. I was actually being tactful, Stephen.
I was expressing my disillusionment with how business, generally gets conducted.
Yeah, and so what I was shown in this is in my journey of after this information came in, it wasn't just a one-time deal. This was something that I still have to process it, because, it's not easy to not look at some of the destructive things we do. Absolutely. And to say, well, I love us anyway, Right. Well, but it was really talking about that and this criticism that is so prominent now about men and male energy and the things that men have done. And what the earth said to me was, everything is made of me. Everything you make is made of me. And she took me on this journey. And again, this was over a course of years. This was not just a one-time deal. And took me on a journey about, look at what men have done They have created safety, and they have created structures and homes where we can be warm, and we have food, and we have shelter, and they have created transportation. And not that women haven't done that too. Again, I'm not trying to be gender based here. So for all of the people that might want to extract out a piece of it, this isn't so much about specifically gender. It's about recognizing some of the really amazing accomplishments that we make as human beings. I always love the movie Love Actually, because that's what I believe, is that if we focus our attention on the love that's here, that's what we would see, and that's what we would believe in, and that's what we would believe about ourselves. And then we would create from that belief. And then I was shown that the belief in us being destructive goes back thousands of years. It's embedded in our cellular memory. It's embedded in our belief systems. It's taught to us as children, the belief in original sin. And what I'm always shown with this work is that revealing of the spirit, that in truth, we are actually incredible and beautiful beings of the light. We are incredible creations, and part of this magnificent creation of this earth, and all the masculine, the feminine, all the opposition. We have love and fear and triumph and tragedy. It all happens at the same time. And I guess part of it became my form of activism in that time. That is what I personally can do, is help people to find the tools and techniques to remember that incredible spirit that they are, that beautiful vitality that they are, that's inside, that their life force is in truth. Like, what could be more amazing than our physical being, that it can embody our spirit and our soul, and that we can have life here on this planet.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And it brought back, the feeling and the memories from Karama. So we have just a couple of minutes left, Colleen. Talk a little bit about your offerings. I know you have classes there in the Portland area, in Gresham. You travel around and do classes. What have you got coming up?
Well, I teach Reiki 1 and 2 classes just about every month here in Gresham, which is just right outside of Portland. So I always say Portland. And I teach ART master classes. All my classes, of course, are Holy Fire 2 Reiki classes. And I teach ART master classes just about every other month here. And I also teach Karuna Reiki, Holy Fire 2 Karuna Reiki classes. And again, here. This year, I am also teaching with William Rand in Hawaii in August, and we're again doing a 7-day class, just like we do on Karama Mountain, where we have a 3-day class that we stretch into 7 days, so we can have half the day in class and half the day to play on in Hawaii at the beach and at the waterfalls. And yeah, it's kind of...
You might have to look at that.
So that is coming up in August. I believe it's like August 15th. I'd have to look at the exact dates. And then just like you and I were talking, we have another class in Japan coming up. And again, September 16th through the 23rd for the Holy Fire 2 ART Masterclass, and the 23rd through the 30th for the Holy Fire Corona class. I do have to say, and both of those classes in Hawaii and the classes in Japan, you'll go to William Rand's website for that, and that's reiki.org. My website is reikilifestyle.com, and you can always get to those classes through me. But
yeah, we'll be sure to put the put those links up on, on Facebook so everybody can find those. Okay. I really want to thank you, Colleen. This has been so amazing. We definitely want to have you back. There's so much you
Great.
have to share.
Love to come back.
And so we really appreciate you joining us this evening. We'll be back next Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific. And until then, be well and namaste.
Thank